Teachers at Reddit, what clicked about a pupil after meeting their parents? When I was student teaching, 2nd grade, there was a little boy in the class who was just a genuinely friendly and sweet kid. He struggled a little academically when it came to learning to read and his handwriting had some problems. But he was the hardest worker and never got frustrated or thought that we was stupid, like many other students with those difficulties do. He was well liked by everyone and didn't have a mean bone in his body. And he was extremely well adjusted. Despite the fact that his parents were divorced. I ended up meeting both parents separately during field trips. Both parents are extremely involved in his life and put him ahead of any of their problems they have with each other. They genuinely want what's best for him and it shows. The dad takes him out to the sports bar for boys' night where they share root beer, which I thought was really cool. Both parents genuinely are awesome people with great attitudes and it definitely shows in their kid. Not a teacher, but a youth worker. Sibling group. All speak as if they are deaf. Accent. Incorrect emphasis. Excluded sounds. And exhibit rash. Impulsive behavior. High instances of school refusal. But polite. Ambitious. Aspirational. Popular and well dressed. Turns out mum had an intellectual disability and was a drug addict, so all 3 kids had IDs and possibly FASD. But grandma was a drug dealer, so they always had loads of money for clothes and food. And drugs. Kids had just learned to speak like that based on their mum's speech, which was affected by her constant drug use. Sad. My wife called a student's parents to talk about the kid swearing all the time and general bad attitude. After explaining to the mom why she was calling, I told that goddamn kid a million f-king times to watch his f-king mouth. Jesus Christ, wait till his f-king daddy gets home. I notice quite a few negative stories here. Well, here is a positive one where it clicked. I have a student who is really friendly, really smart, and amazing at English. I am an ESL teacher abroad. She is always really friendly to me and always really hardworking. She constantly helps other kids in class who struggle with the material and overall just a great girl. I met her dad once at a school event and holy goodness was this guy awesome. He was a really genuine and generous character and even invited me to get to know different parts of the city with his family. I could definitely tell they had a close bond and that he had raised her really well. Just an example of good people raising other good people. Edit. Kindergarten teacher here. Had a student who would much rather sing everything than talk. And she was happiest just spinning around in circles and singing. Met her parents' band teacher and a dance instructor. I don't know if this counts, but I used to help tutor ESL to Spanish speaking immigrants. There was one woman who was super focused and dedicated and was making real improvements lesson to lesson. But she would miss massive amounts of time because she said she had to work, take care of her kid, and it really hurt her studies. She was stressed and frustrated all of the time even though she said she loved her job and was doing alright for herself. Then one day she brought her mother in because she hadn't been to tutoring in a month and needed to come, I guess. That woman was a terror. She wasn't even that old. Probably in her late 50s. She yelled at her granddaughter, who also came along, and would smack her randomly, complaining that she was so ill-behaved. It clicked that the woman was missing so much time because she had to babysit her mother just as much as her daughter. I felt so bad for her that she had such a burden, and yet so much respect that she'd go through so much to care for her mother. This is kind of different, but I thought it was sort of interesting. 2 weeks after I started high school, all the parents and students were invited to an informative tour around the school. Or something like that. I do not remember. But this was at 6 PM, so it was not mandatory for students to attend. I was basically the only student. We were welcomed to sit down randomly in our classroom. The interesting thing is that almost every parent took their own child's seat without knowing it. Or a seat very close to it. It was so strange and I could see the similarities. Even the questions they asked. After a mom asked about the library, all I could think was that's such a f***ing Sarah question to ask. I wasn't a teacher, but a student. and I was close to one of the caseworkers in high school. She dealt with more troubled teens. And ones that grew up with horrible parents, legal guardians and so on. However, there was this one girl who always wore the same clothes. Absolutely stunk, like no showers or brushing of teeth. She didn't brush her hair and was quite boisterous amongst other red flags. The CW sat down with her one day and opened the purse the girl brought, looking for a pen. Girl gave consent, and out came at least 5 cockroaches. Needless to say, my CW was taken aback as she didn't expect these vile things to come out when looking for a pen. I'm pretty sure she called social services CPS after that, and they found out that her family were hoarders and neglected their well-being and their children. This girl in prep already showed traits of a narcissist sociopath. She was an extremely clever but lacked empathy, manipulative, blatantly lied, stole and so on. Yes. This might just sound like characteristics of any child, but there was definitely something different about her. Anyway, met her mum, who refused to accept that her child would do anything wrong. And when the child admitted she stole a girl's bracelet because she wanted it, her mum said, "That's okay, we can go buy you one on the way home." I teach grade 7 in the US, 12-13 years olds. 13 years old student constantly in low grade trouble. The 3 Ds, disobedience, disrespect and disruption. I shrugged it off, figuring something was up at home. Meet mom at PTC. She's obviously young. We start conference and she offers, "I'm sorry, student name is such a handful. I just don't have time to discipline him like he needs. I'm 27 and I have 5 kids." All 4 teachers in the conference can be seen subtracting 13 from 27. My 5th grade teacher said she understood why at times I couldn't finish my homework or fall asleep in class after seeing my mother had cancer. I'm sure before that she thought I was lazy. She became super close with my mom after, and the day my mom passed away, still in 5th grade, she cried in class when they messaged her. And that's how I knew it was over. I personally believe teachers make a huge impact in a child's life, and she really helped me out and understood. Kid named Rowdy. Super nice kindergartner. Wondered why the hell his name was Rowdy. Met his mom. Dad was MIA. Lived with grandma in a hoarder house, and they smoked inside with the window closed. He graduated last spring. Saw him walking in the rain at 9 AM. Not sure where he was headed, but all I could think was he was headed in the wrong direction. I'm not teacher, but I work in a shelter for abused women and children. I've heard way too many horror stories, but the thing that horrified me the most is when I see the moms who treat their kids like they are lower than shit. Calling them down. Telling them to shut up rather than calming them when they cry. Ignoring them. Had a mom whose son had his arm broken trying to save her from her abusive partner. Treated him like he was scum of the earth. Didn't properly care for his arm. The child was so broken he not only could not look me in the eye or smile, he could literally not lift his head when he stood. It was most often propped against a wall. These kids, I wonder every day what sorts of adults they will become. Really liked what a previous post said, pressure can burst pipes or make diamonds. One of my students is safe playing. He won't try any new ideas while doing maths and would frequently look out to applying some formulas. I used to think that he genuinely is less creative than others. But at times, particularly when playing games, he would show bursts of real brilliance. When I met his mother, it clicked why. The mother burst into tears saying she was afraid what would happen if the child would fail. She really desperately wanted him to succeed, and because of this desire has all but closed his chances of success. He is so afraid of failure that he doesn't even try. There was another one. He was really afraid of both succeeding and failing. His line of thinking went like, if I succeed, the parents would expect more. So, let's fail. Then, he will flip. If I fail, they will scold me. He led a torturous life. I have a belief that the 2 biggest blocks in the development of a child are his school and his parents. Most of the flaws in a kid's personality can be attributed to one of the two or both. I work at an elementary school in a really bad part of town and I teach 3rd graders. Parents coming in reeking of pot and parents with like 5 other kids that they obviously can't care for individually are always the worst. I've had to send many kids home with the police because parents could not decide who will pick the child up. We even hold them until after 6, but mostly the children who yell, scream, curse and hit their parents will come in yelling and cursing at them. Didn't actually meet the parents, but was recently told about the parents of a 9th grader I have. Apparently, the dad is super verbally abusive, constantly belittling the son, like bordering on reportable abuse, but just not quite over that line, his former teachers said. This kid acts out, is constantly seeking positive attention, has no self-esteem, despite being pretty smart and capable. It all just makes a lot of sense now. Edit. For all the people who are saying that I should report it, I have not personally witnessed the abuse, nor have I even met the parents in question, so it wouldn't be appropriate for me to report it anyway. In fact, in my state, there are penalties if I were to do so. But moreover, I trust my colleagues who have taught him and have witnessed the negative interactions with the dad. And I believe that they have the requisite experience and judgment to have been able to make the determination not to report the father. Edit 2. Thank you all for your concern though. And I'm very sorry for those who have gone through something like this. Removed. One female organ student I had always wore dresses that were very revealing, both above the knee and in cleavage. When she'd sit on the organ bench for a lesson, it was almost embarrassing. I wondered why she'd insist on dressing this way until I met her parents. Her mother dressed identically, to the point where other parents would study her movements as she walked across the room at a reception after student recitals. It was a classic case of like mother, like daughter. And her father seemed to revel in it. And her father seemed to revel in it. And this just made it disturbing. I had this 8th grade girl. Straight A's. Lead role in the school musical. Top student on the track team. Super warm and friendly personality. She came into conferences with her parents. She was frozen and quiet. Her parents never smiled. They pulled out quizzes where she got A-minuses. They asked her where she was struggling. What wasn't she understanding? What can she do to get more help from the teacher? She's 14 years old and I just feel like that kind of pressure is going to break her one day. When I was student teaching, I had a student who seemed to have textbook fetal alcohol syndrome. Then one day I saw her with her mother at Target. And I recognized her mother as one of the longtime regulars, i.e. chronic alcoholics, at a bar I worked at in college. The whole thing made sense. And it was very sad. 9th grader thought she was entitled to an A despite her work not being A quality work. Let alone B quality. Met her mom a few weeks into the school year, who happens to be on our board of directors. She also has a habit of treating teachers as if they're lesser thans, and is essentially enabled by our school founder. On top of that, her son, a senior at the time, didn't earn college acceptance. However, our principal lied at graduation and said he'd gotten into a university he hadn't actually been admitted to. Why? Because our school is touted as a college preparatory. Can't possibly mar our good name. My best friend is a teacher. He told about this one kid's parents he met. The kid was insanely smart, 12th. Genius level. He would finish his work and just play on his phone or talk to friends. But he had zero homework turn-in rate. My friend requested to meet his parents. Ended up finding out that his father would beat him repeatedly. And the kid would never truly go home, but rather take up working instead of being home with his father. It was sad because the kid admitted that he was capable of doing his homework. But he was too scared to. And just didn't have to face his dad. Apparently later the kid came back to meet a couple teacher, including my friend. He rolled up in a BMW i8. I guess he made it out somewhere. I was telling the parent that their child was generally inattentive. He would look around, fidget, and just nod along smiling when I knew he hadn't been listening. As I was consulting my notes, I looked up to see the parent looking around the room, bouncing their leg. As soon as they realized that I was done talking, they nodded and smiled. Edit. This child did not have ADHD or autism. He just had a short attention span. I was teaching in a private school in the Middle East, and although most students should have been ESL, they were taught English at a higher level. I figure he just didn't care that much. They say there is a genetic component to ADD. Obviously an extreme example here, but I had a student, an 8th grader, who was quiet to the point of absolute silence, but who did extraordinarily well with the written word. A few times, he showed up with bruises, which I naturally reported, but he was adamant that they were from other students. Surprisingly, his parents came in for PTC and seemed relatively normal, until he went to speak for himself and I saw his father grip his arm so tightly that it left a mark. I understood immediately that his parents basically didn't let him speak at all for fear of reprisal. A few weeks afterward, the kid stopped showing up to school, and word eventually got around that he got caught up in a meth lab explosion in his parents' house and was covered head to toe in 2nd and 3rd degree burns. He came back a month or so later, covered in bandages. He couldn't move, write, or really do anything without excruciating pain. I'd never cried so hard as I did that day. Sorry. I know it got off track, but there are certain stories that stick with you. Student teaching for high school seniors and juniors. I had this guy that was a shady 80. No specific problems, just very low intelligence. But this guy worked his ass off. Never a late assignment. Did all extra credit that was offered. Usually extra credit is done by those who don't need it and ignored by those who do need it. Made flashcards for like every test and quiz even though I never said to. Model student. Just had low test scores. If it was an assignment that could be done with time and effort, he did it. Unfortunately tests aren't like that, and that's where he had the most problems. Back to school night comes along and I meet his dad. Anko in the Marines. Courteous, well spoken, and completely knowledgeable about all of his son's upcoming assignments and grades. Totally made sense. Kid is getting through with hard work and dedication and pulling off a B average. Amazing what support from parents can do. In most cases, a kid like this would probably be failing most of his classes. This is less dramatic than the others, but still one of those aha moments. Had an 8th grade student. Great kid. 100% responsible. Academically talented, and would always speak in short clipped sentences and look like he was a frightened deer about to bolt. Had a conference with him and his parents together in which the kid was supposed to be leading the conference, reflecting on his growth and identifying his challenges. Every time the kid opened his mouth to say something, he'd get halfway through the sentence and mom would finish it for him. Poor kid was always trying to get ideas out quickly so he wouldn't be interrupted. I had a 2nd grade student who was constantly getting into pretty serious physical altercations with others, stabbing kids with pencils, slapping girls across the face, etc. The first time I met his mom was when she came up to the school threatening to choke me because I said her son couldn't come on a field trip to the pumpkin patch because he was too violent. Not a teacher, but I do volunteer work for a program designed to help students who are habitually truant. Had one middle schooler who was super bright, genuinely seemed to love school, got great grades, but was absent about half the time. He was very evasive about why he wasn't coming to class, and I honestly didn't put him high on my list because he was doing fine even with the missed days. When I was finally able to get a social worker to go by his house, it turned out his single mother was having seizures and didn't have any healthcare, so she couldn't get treatment for them. And the kid was staying home to take care of both her and his younger brother. I felt just terrible for the kid having to be so adult while still in middle school. I was a teacher in a deaf school for many years. Kids lived on campus as well. I would take the kids home for visits on weekends. One kid was a major behavior problem and always screamed and yelled and broke things and was just generally all around disruptive. We got along better than most staff did, so I volunteered to take him home one weekend. He missed his van. When I got to his house, none of his family members even looked at him. He was a teenager by this point. F-king family never took the time to learn sign language. Yeah. All his problems made a lot of sense to me at that point. College freshman was constantly late. Didn't turn work in on time or at all. Etc. She had an excuse for every single thing. I wasn't even asking. She just volunteered excuses. After getting a D in my class, which was frankly a bit generous as her actual grade was a high F, her mother called me. I wasn't allowed to discuss a student's performance with anyone, including their parents. And I told her as much. Her mother then, unprompted, gave me a long string of excuses for her daughter and, oddly, herself. I kind of thought, oh, that makes sense now.